What are some of the consistencies that these companies are often looking for or indexing for within candidates that they're trying to recruit?
I think no matter the job market, no matter the circumstances, I do think that people still don't research enough. They don't prepare enough.
But there is kind of a narrative online, and I think in kind of candidate communities, that people use case studies to essentially get free consultation and work from individuals who are going through the interview processes. What's your take on this?
So what I would recommend is...
Hello and welcome to another awesome episode of the Open to Work podcast. As you know, at the Open to Work podcast, we are here to help you navigate this super challenging job market through bringing on really experienced leaders who know exactly what is happening behind the scenes and can help you through your job search. If you have any questions for guests and you want to kind of engage more, obviously like and subscribe. We love when you engage and write us questions. And you can also write into us at opentowork@gmail.com. And so with no further ado, I'm super excited to introduce friend and colleague Fritz Singer, who's the VP of Talent Acquisition at Personio. Welcome, Fritz.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I think you're our first Dutch-based guest. So you're based in Amsterdam at the moment, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not Dutch, so your first Dutch guest, but not Dutch.
First Dutch-based guest. Netherlands-based guest. There we go. Why don't we start off by... in our kind of standard way that we do on the Open to Work podcast, and model that very fun interview question of tell me about yourself. So as if you were being interviewed, Fritz, why don't you tell us about yourself?
All right. I will maybe answer it a little bit shorter than I would if I was being interviewed, but I'll do my best. So I always like to tell people, especially in Europe, that my name is misleading because my accent gives myself away. I am not European, despite the name, which is very German, especially working for a German company now, which I'll come to shortly. It is misleading, but I'm originally from Canada. I grew up in the States, started my recruiting career in San Francisco on the agency side, recruiting agency side. And then I joined Uber when Uber was about 400 people globally, and spent 5 years there. It was about 24,000 by the time I left. So in recruiting, that was a very exhausting 5 years, but I learned a ton there. And those are some of my fondest years just from a career perspective. But I went with Uber over to Amsterdam. So that brought me to Amsterdam about 8 years ago now. And then after Uber, I've spent a few stints across various kind of high growth unicorns as well. So joined Lime after Uber, which is a micromobility company, and was leading EMEA recruiting for Lime at the time as they were kind of expanding and growing quite considerably outside of the US. And then joined Checkout.com most recently. Was there for a couple of years. Checkout.com is a UK-based payments company, for those that are not aware. And I was there for 2 years, and we doubled the company from about 1,000 to 2,000. Mm-hmm. Had a lot of good experiences, but I was leading TA there. That was my first foray into kind of leading a TA, talent acquisition function. Also had an employer brand at Checkout.com, and that was a lot of lessons learned in terms of the growth that we saw at Checkout, and then obviously through some of the just challenges with COVID and kind of the market volatility. There's a lot that happened, which I'm happy to speak to. Mostly good in that time. And then most recently joined Personio. So I've been at Personio for the last year. Just hit my year mark last week, actually. And here at Personio, I am leading talent acquisition, employer brand as well. And for those that don't know Personio, we are kind of an all-in-one HR software platform. So think of core HR technology as well as other product offerings. So ATS and comp planning, employee surveys, the like. So we support small and medium businesses as well as kind of moving into the mid-market space. So I am based in Amsterdam, as you mentioned. I have teams kind of scattered across Europe and the US as well. But my kind of career has, again, been kind of, I would say, anchored around high growth organizations, scaling companies, and I've had some involvement, direct or indirect, in hiring across all continents, which has been a very exciting, interesting experience, and kind of across all different functions. So from tech to non-tech and executive, all to kind of more junior, early careers or kind of graduate hiring. And I think I've supported or kind of led teams that have hired in maybe 80 or so countries, if I had to add them up. Nice. So Uber was kind of scattered across the world. So that was kind of quick summary on myself. On the personal side, I have a family of 2 small children, 3-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son. And a lovely wife who is also in the TA space. So we spend a lot of evenings talking about work, which is good and bad.
I personally, I think I would struggle to have a wife that was in the TA space. I think I talk enough TA during my day job to let alone then have more conversations about recruitment.
It's helpful, but it is not always easy to kind of turn yourself off when you leave the office or kind of close the laptop.
Yeah, for sure. But it must be nice to have like someone to be able to bounce around ideas and like know that you're not going, not going insane alone.
Exactly. Yeah, she's a head of TA as well for a German tech company, surprisingly enough. So yes, a lot in common.
Amazing. And so I think one of the like real standouts, like I think if you look at Fritz's like LinkedIn and listen to that story, is that you've worked for kind of some of the major kind of hyperscaling brands around the world. So obviously Uber, everyone knows, and Lime, lots and lots of people know now, and especially after they were acquired by Uber, and you can get Lime bikes and mobility kind of scooters or whatever, all around the world. Checkout.com, I think, is a company that, and Personio are companies that people might know less about, but have gone through like insane periods of scaling through the last few years. I mean, what do you feel as the recruiting leader who's kind of been in everything from being in the trenches through to now running teams at scale? What are some of the consistencies that these companies are often looking for or indexing for in candidates that they're trying to recruit?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things I would kind of point to as I think about candidates when I interview people either for my team or other parts of the business in these organizations. I think first and foremost, I think we very much look for people that are kind of scrappy, that are hands-on, that are kind of doers in a lot of ways, people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and just kind of get things done and are very much solutions oriented, because as you can imagine, for those that haven't worked in scale ups or kind of startup environments, resources are oftentimes kind of a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. And you need people that are going to plug the gaps, either in roles that they're not comfortable doing, haven't done themselves, or that are maybe at some points above them, right, in terms of pay grade, role level, or below them, similarly in terms of kind of level or kind of role. And so you need that mentality that is okay to just kind of step in and kind of get what the team needs done or what the business needs done. So that that hands-on mentality is quite important, and we look for that when we interview people, we talk to people. So proven experience and kind of examples of times where they had to be scrappy and just kind of get the job done. And you don't always see that, especially as we speak to people that have been in established businesses. Not to say that they don't have that mentality, because there's naturally people that do from those organizations, but oftentimes those big companies don't allow people to operate in that way, because they kind of are stuck in a box because their role is X, Y, Z, and that's it. And it's very kind of structured in a way that almost prevents them from kind of being that scrappy individual. So that is definitely kind of the first thing I would say.
And how do you evaluate that? Because I think a lot of folks that I kind of speak to, they have the ability to do certain roles and like to be scrappy, for example, if we continue to use that example, but they have been in this environment where they haven't been platformed to. So how do you evaluate someone's ability to do something versus their kind of track record of having done it already? And where's the kind of balance for you? So Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that comes in interview questioning, right? So it's what have you done? So asking questions specifically around experience.
Yeah.
And I think good interviewers, and whether that's on the talent acquisition side or even on the business side, shouldn't just be focused on experience, right? It's okay. What have you done? Talk me through an example, how you went about doing it. What was the outcome? That's great. But then if there's not an environment that they've maybe been exposed to that's similar, or there's not examples where you're getting what you want, it's like, how do you actually switch that to say, okay, that's great experience, but this is what we're trying to solve for. If you were to step into this environment, how would you go about doing it? And so kind of, again, giving somebody the opportunity to prove themselves rather than setting them up for failure based on their experience. And so I think the line of questioning and how you actually interview is quite important. And then another thing that I've seen consistently across all of these organizations, especially at the more senior level, but even kind of in kind of mid to junior levels, is that we have case studies that actually kind of showcase somebody's ability to do that work, whether that is a take-home assignment or a live kind of case study and conversation, because then as an interviewing team, we can actually probe on some of those examples or those traits that we're looking for, and it gives people the opportunity to prove themselves on kind of what the business and what the team's looking for.
Case studies are, I think, a really interesting topic. I mean, not one that we've gone into in kind of a lot of detail on this podcast before, but they are, like, when we look at the data and kind of evaluating candidates and their predictors for successes, doing a work sample is, statistically speaking, one of the best predictors of success of whether or not you can do the role. And so that's kind of translated into lots and lots of companies all around the world asking for individuals to do case studies. However, how those case studies are executed from company to company are really difficult. And if you're especially going through multiple interview processes, or you're a working parent, or you have other commitments outside of work, delivering case study can be really, really difficult. So maybe as we brought it up as a topic, what advice would you give to firstly to candidates when they get kind of given a case study? How would you approach it? What is the kind of, how would you interact with the company and kind of guide your way to making sure that you're delivering the right case study response that they are looking for? How would you prepare for that scenario? I imagine you've also done like a ton of these in varying qualities in your career as well.
I have, yeah. For context, I think my case study that I provided for Personio was, I think I had 8 people in the room when I presented it, which
that is too many people.
I would argue is definitely too many, right? A bit of a waste.
I did one that had 12 people in the room, and I knew going into it, I was like, the chances of you getting a yes decision out of 12 people being in the room for something to make a decision is almost impossible.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's, there's definitely a balance to.
Yeah, you must have done really well then.
Well enough, I guess. Exactly. I got enough yeses. So what I would recommend is, I guess, first of all, make sure you are excited enough about the role to kind of pursue, because the reality is when I interview somebody, and when most organizations interview somebody, they want to make sure that somebody is excited and motivated for the role for the right reasons. And I think a case study is a very clear indicator for somebody's engagement and kind of where it might be faltering or just not fully kind of committed. And so I think that preparation is quite important for a case study. So I think first of all, just be excited, be kind of committed, and don't spread yourself thin across your interview processes. But that's obviously not always an easy thing to do if you're actively looking, or if you kind of don't have a job at the moment. So obviously there's again a balance there. I think the thing to set you up for success is be very clear in terms of the questions and what the hiring team is trying to get out of the case study. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I'm hiring a leader right now. I have all my leaders complete a case study because I think, to your point, it gives the candidate a good opportunity to see what they're stepping into.
Yeah.
And I try to give them the reality of the role, because they then, it helps them to understand, picture kind of themselves in that role and what they're setting themselves up for. So I think that's great. And then from my perspective, to your point, I get to see their working products, how they'll actually show up in the job. And so as I'm kind of going through that, I will provide the case study with as many of the assumptions, as much of the data, and kind of some of the holistic, I would say, like tangential points that are useful for the candidate to set them up for success, because I want to make sure they are successful in the role, right? I don't want 10 people doing a case study. That's not good for anybody. And so I try to provide that. But at the end of the day, as a candidate, you should make sure you feel confident in terms of what I, as the hiring manager, want out of that case study. So ask follow-up questions, get specific data that is going to be useful for you. If you're making assumptions, check in on those assumptions. Are they the right ones or wrong ones? How will that impact the actual case study? So I think just being very, very clear as to what the hiring team is getting out of it. And then I always think that professionals should lean on their peer groups and kind of their network as much as possible. So just like I have done a lot of case studies in my career, I know my friends or kind of previous colleagues have also done them. So I will send case studies. I thankfully again have a partner at home that I can kind of lean on. But I've used ex coworkers, colleagues as sounding boards on specific topics, just to make sure that I am not missing something based on the market trends or something else that might be in the case study.
Yeah, I think those 2 points are really consistent with my perception as well. Like understanding, so like when you're preparing for a case study, make sure to ask as many questions as you feel comfortable to ensure that you're set up for success. Like really, really make sure that you understand what is expected. What does the brief need to look like? What does the outcome need to look like? What are they expecting? Like I see a lot of people just take a brief and then immediately run with it and often end up getting kind of down an accidental path that is tangential and not really the core of what they were looking for. Yeah. But there is kind of this a narrative online, and I think in kind of candidate communities, that people use case studies to essentially get free consultation and work from individuals who are going through the interview processes. What's your take on this? Like, because I personally haven't seen this and never ever experienced this, but lots of people feel like this is what's happening to them when they like go through extensive case study process. What's your read? We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls.
Yeah, I've seen it obviously in my career that is a perception, or people have even come back. I remember I do where this would be an example. Okay, let's use an example like Uber Eats now kind of exists across many markets, right? I'm sure there was a case study before Uber Eats ever existed. Somebody saying, "Oh, Uber should be used to deliver food," right? And then that candidate coming back and say, "Oh, you stole my idea," right? That is not why case studies are kind of coming about, right? It's like these ideas are kind of happening kind of across the board, and there's a lot of smart, talented people within organizations that are kind of coming up with these ideas, maybe successfully, maybe unsuccessfully. I think the case study, the real focus is to make sure that we are assessing people in a thoughtful way. I mean, similarly on interview side of things, you could ask questions and fish for ideas, right? It's the same thing, in my opinion. So I understand the viewpoint, right? I mean, I think that's something that people want to feel comfortable in terms of just like leaving an interview process without their ideas, their creativity being taken. Yeah. But I have never seen it being used in a kind of malicious way or a way that is then for the business's benefit.
Yeah, I'd say I agree. And my kind of other thought on this is that it's potentially a bit counterintuitive, because if an idea was good enough that they wanted to, coming up with an idea is actually not hard. It's the implementation of that's really difficult.
Execution, exactly.
And if the idea was good enough and they felt confident enough that it was going to move the needle for their business, they'd probably hire you to do it because the return on investment would clearly be there, because you have the IP and knowledge to be able to implement and deliver it. So moving, and I guess just to kind of round things out, talking a bit about Personio, What can I expect, do you think, as a candidate kind of going through the Personio process? What's kind of the advice that you would give to me to prepare for going through your recruitment process?
Yeah, while I hate to say it, I don't think it's again too dissimilar to what I've mentioned, kind of what I think you might see in other organizations. I think there's an element of so in terms of the process, right? It's some combination of a case study or take home or kind of technical assessment that would take place. Some combination of meeting the team, the hiring manager, and we do offer optional peer conversations, peer chats
Nice.
within the team, so people can understand kind of whether it's the the culture of the team or kind of what it's like within that kind of team itself. And then we also do have a culture interview. So that is something that we as a business from our early days have felt quite strongly
What can I expect in a
about.
culture interview out of interest?
Yeah, so kind of the way this started was our founder and CEO Hano, and the other founders would always interview every candidate as part of the hiring process. And so in order to get hired, that was just necessary. And so they were really focused on kind of, does this person live the values that we want, right? Do they kind of, are they a culture add in terms of kind of what we're looking for as we continue to scale? And do they have the right mindset to kind of make sure that we're continuing to grow as an organization? At a certain point, as any kind of founder-led interviews, as this kind of happens, is that we scaled too fast. Founders only have so much time, and so we needed to relinquish that control within the organization. And so, as part of that, we made it important distinction between the hiring process and within that the culture interview. So making sure that we have very consistent interview criteria, questions for people to assess culture, and that is for us. We have operating principles that we have across the organization. As an example, exceeding customer expectations, right? So we have questions assigned to that. And so across our 5 operating principles, we will take some flavor of each of those to assess candidates. And so I think back to your questions, how individuals and candidates can really prepare. As an example for that topic, we have these publicly accessible and facing is making sure you understand what are the cultural values or operating principles that Personio or any other organization have, and how can you make sure that you either are prepared for that, but also can speak to specific or recent examples you have that maybe line up to those principles that the company holds so dearly.
Yeah, and I think it's a good piece of advice, right? Because most businesses have some sort of publicly declared culture and values and mission and stuff like that. And being really thoroughly understanding that, I think, as a candidate is important for you just to know, so that you know the sorts of business and values that you're getting into. And hopefully they align with yours as well. But also because you probably are going to get quizzed in some sort of through these lenses at some point. Whether or not it's a whole interview dedicated to it. And I've definitely been through a couple of these style of interviews, and they're just focusing on your culture and mission and values. But they may do that, or they may just be woven in from interview to interview, and everyone might take like one value that they might have a question related to it, and it could be like tell me about a time when you've show an empathy to someone, like something as basic as that, right, all the way through to something very specific to their values. So I think doing some prep around their question that could be asked through mission, vision, and values, I think is a great piece of advice on how to prepare. And actually using things like ChatGPT to say, write me a list of behavioral interview questions against these values and behaviors. It will get like 70% of them right, and 70% of them are probably worth like having a good answer in your back pocket for, just in case. And I guess my last question, you have a great talent acquisition network, you have a significant team, you're hiring hundreds of people, if not thousands a year. What are some of the kind of consistencies, kind of consistent errors you're seeing potentially in candidates, or like missteps you're seeing in the candidate kind of universe right now? And what recommendations, based on the conversations you see online and the feedback you're getting from your recruiters in your team, what kind of insights or feedback would you give to candidates right now, no matter where they're kind of applying?
Yeah, I think that I think no matter the job market, no matter the circumstances, I do think that people still don't research enough. They don't prepare enough. I think no matter what, that kind of rings true. I think that when I speak to people, like being detailed and kind of how you talk about your experience, being able to actually answer questions and not just kind of respond in a way that you think people want to hear, but actually kind of clarifying what people want to hear, clarifying kind of the detail, and actually bringing sound examples. I think a lot of times I say no to people. It's because they can't confidently answer with kind of detail and back it up with proven examples. So I think that is consistent. I think that I think people, especially right now in the market, because of the amount of it's just a candidate-driven market still. I still think that people have an opportunity to lean on their network and try to get referred to organizations in a better way. So this isn't necessarily why people are getting rejected, but I think that it's a better opportunity for how you can actually get a job is leaning on your network, because as organizations, we continue to and will always want people that are referred and kind of known through proven kind of individuals internally. And so leaning on your network to get referred to organizations and try to get introduced to companies that you're interested in, I think is an important one. But yeah, I think
those are three really good points, and I think just to kind of summarize, so doing your research, like someone will always prepare more than you, and you have to be prepared to like really know that you've left everything on the table. I think, and that goes to doing your research in the company, understanding their business, really understanding their model and how they make money. And if you don't know something, that means you can ask really interesting and insightful questions and drive a very good and highly relatable conversation. So I think like super good point. The second one on like interview prep, like having these examples top of mind, like is so important. I coach so many people where they haven't written down anywhere their responses, and like some people naturally have a flair and be able to bring these examples to their mind, but most of us can't do that off the top of my head. And you walk away from an interview and like, oh, I had all these other examples. Like that's because you didn't prepare and put them in writing, make sure they're really fresh, like have a piece of paper there that you could refer to, like do anything that you think is going to help bring these examples to the top of your head so that you can be structured and insightful when you get asked a question by Fritz in the final stage of an interview. Yeah. And then, that last one is that using your referral, we see the data out there, 25% of all jobs are coming from referrals. And so, leveraging your network and, using your network to get you in front of the right people in an organization is a super valuable and impactful tool. And using LinkedIn as a way to kind of try and build that, I think is always a great start. So our final question that was left to you by a previous guest: what is the career accomplishment you're most proud of?
I think coming to Amsterdam, adapting to the kind of, the reality of operating in 45 countries and kind of managing teams in 45 countries, or kind of hiring in 45 countries, I should say. But then going back to one of my points earlier, I made it a point to actually recruit and kind of do some of the work as a hands-on leader. And, I hired a head of business development in Pakistan and a security manager in Johannesburg and a lawyer in Egypt. And in that experience really kind of gave me the confidence that I could just adapt to kind of whatever the business needed and do it in a way that was going to, I would say, drive the right results. So I think that adaptability and that kind of mindset has really stuck with me. And so I think that's something that really sticks out to me, just kind of as a theme. So less of a specific example per se.
I love that as well, like specifically for like a North American audience, often because the US is such a massive country with such a huge amount of TAM, like, of revenue. Often I find that American leaders or recruiters never have to leave or think about anywhere else other than North America as part of their skill experience or skill set. And so if you do have the opportunity to recruit or engage with a business or even live in a country outside of America, it will really broaden your experience. I mean, you are so much more of a kind of global leader, and you never know where that might take you. But I see this as like really consistently for all the US businesses that I've worked within, that they very rarely have had the experience to broaden outside of that. And it's such an amazing asset if you have it.
Yeah. And for those that work in Europe that maybe have a boss in the US, working for a US company, I mean, I think not losing sight of that and trying to manage up in a very thoughtful way and kind of being very detailed as to implications of operating in Europe is very important. I mean, to your point, when I was at Uber in San Francisco, everyone kind of had this mindset of Europe operating in a very kind of consistent way, right? Whether it's employment law or just culture, and that is so far from the truth. And so being able to make sure that you can educate U.S. colleagues, because I hate to say it, U.S. Folks are not the most, I would say, worldly in some ways, and so that's an important thing not to lose sight of.
Yeah, I mean, obviously our listenership that we have here is probably very worldly because they're listening to a podcast.
Of course they are.
By a Brit and another Brit that was living in America and listening to a Canadian person living in Amsterdam. So I'm sure they're loving it. But I generally speaking, I agree, right? Like there is, an adage of Americans focusing on America, and because you can be very successful just in that market. Whereas I think if you're live and breathe European or UK based kind of companies, you have to know the European markets and multinational markets in order to be successful, and you probably know the US as well. So broadening your experience either way, but then understanding how do you educate others in the kind of geographies that you are a knowledge center in is a really valuable piece of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, I am half Canadian, half American, so I'm allowed to say
that.
Okay. Yeah. So anybody listening that's in the US, I'm not full Canadian.
I'm half Canadian and half British, but I've worked predominantly for US-based software businesses.
There you go.
So I feel like I can
get it.
Well. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Fritz. That was super interesting. We got through so many different topics there, and hopefully some really valuable insights into case studies and what it's like hiring and growing in a high-tech environment, and also like the specifics in kind of how to hire at Personio and how you're thinking about the kind of people you're bringing on at Personio. So thank you so much for that insight. And for those of you listening, please, click a follow and subscribe. We're here to kind of help you through navigating this really challenging job market through insight from experienced leaders such as Fritz. And we have so many more amazing guests on the way. So thank you for tuning in. Feel free to email us, opentoworkpod@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.